Go ahead.
Recording in progress. Okay. Good. Yeah, it's been a good morning, everyone. Dona Shiniki Ani Shlido, Tazasana Bashan Shin, Sitna Jini Dashi, Ado Tudichini Dashana, my Toheda Senda Ado Inash. My mother's clan are the Towering House people. My father's clan are the many goats people. And my maternal grandfathers are Black Street people. And then my paternal grandfathers are Bitter Water people. And my original, where my roots are is from a community on the other side of the Arizona border called Hawk, Arizona. That's where my family originates from on my mother's side, and where we claim descendancy from. That's who I am as a human being and a Navajo man, and a relative to my Tenet people. And you see on the bio, some of the experiences that I have is similar to quite a few other people. But we can go ahead and move on. Ms. Pula Shar is going to be joining us in a few minutes. She will be co-presenting. If you've been with us a few times, you know that we have a case study at the end. That's where she presents her extensive knowledge and expertise as a really very fine provider and teacher. But Shar is Hopi Tiwa and Navajo, and has worked for quite a while in the field. Really good colleague, mentor, and ally through the years. And I'm really proud that we have a chance to work together on this, on these series of topics that we've been dealing with. But she'll be on in a minute. She said she's running errands right now.
There she is.
Sure, I was kind of stumbling through your bio. Good morning. Go ahead and show yourself.
Good morning. Perfect timing, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Charlene Pula. I'm a clinical social worker by training. I work at the Albuquerque Area Southwest Tribal Epidemiology Center, known as AZTEC. Currently, we are working on two projects, a tribal opioid response project and a tribal 988 project, and just recently an equine assisted therapy project. And I wanted to just say that, did you already go over kind of the background of why we're doing this?
Not yet. That's on the, no, not yet.
Okay,
It's,
and I'm Hopi Tewa and Navajo. Home is First Mesa Palaca. So good morning, everybody.
mhm.
That's it.
Go ahead, Megan. Megan's running the slides for us today. Sure.
So the other speaker who may be joining us today is Mr. Dan Foster. He has about 37 years of federal experience within the Bureau of Prisons and Indian Health Service. He is a psychiatrist, and him and his wife work together a lot. She's a PhD also in psychology. So they're very good friends of ours and offer a lot of the content and help to support the presentation we're going to bring to you today. So we'll see if Mr. Dan Foster joins us. So we're partnering with the Albuquerque Area Southwest Tribal Epidemiology Center. And so that's in collaboration with our program here in Iowa. It was established in September of 2006, and its mission is to collaborate with 27 American Indian tribes across New Mexico, southern Colorado, and West Texas to provide high-quality health research, surveillance, and trainings to improve the quality of life for American Indians. The main goal is to positively impact the health and well-being of communities that they serve. I'll leave it to you, Ray.
Shar, you want to do the background here?
Sure. So as Megan has shared, Aztec serves 27 tribes under the Albuquerque area IHS framework, if you will. And right now we are working with 9 subawardees at Aztec with we got funding from SAMHSA, 988 Tribal Response. And these are the 9 communities we are working with: Jicarilla, Mescalero, To'Hajiilee, Rama, Ute Mountain Ute, Southern Ute, Kiowa, Zuni, and Isleta. And in this grant, they have to do a community readiness assessment, create an action plan, and identify their crisis response protocols. So we're still in year 1 of this great opportunity, and love working with the tribes. And it's really nice to see all the great work they're doing in the communities. Next slide.
Had to collect my thoughts. Just my cap. So we've done overviews of a number of topics prior to this session, and today we're going to have dialogue discussion on PTSD. We have 4 objectives here. One is to look at signs and symptoms of PTSD from the DSM approach and the way PTSD is understood. Then to have some dialogue around our traditional approaches to addressing post-traumatic stress disorder. We have a number of tribes represented here. So it's our chance to share with each other what we can, our experiences and our knowledge about our traditional ways with post-traumatic stress disorder. And then the third objective deals with how the Euro-American approach, which is basically a DSM approach, a psychiatric approach, what ways within that system exist to help someone who's coping with PTSD. And the fourth objective is to have a discussion around resources that are available to locally assist those with PTSD. And with this is having a discussion about on a case study that Shara will be guiding us through. So we have those 4 objectives to work through this morning with you. We have an hour and a half together, so we'll go through the slides, and I try to give the case study portion about 30 minutes, so we'll end up. And you'll get copies of the slides also. So and Megan's recording, so later on you can look at the recording of this time we have together on the website that's available. So post-traumatic stress disorder occurs when a bad thing happens to us. And there's a statement there that not everyone exposed to trauma develops PTSD. And the thing to keep in mind when I look at that statement, I think that there are different aspects of trauma reaction. It can be mild to severe, and so there are reactions to that. And one of the more recent traumas that almost everyone has experienced, for example, is the pandemic. pandemic has been a traumatic experience for our people and the world. And so we've had different kinds of reactions to that trauma. And some of our people are experiencing symptoms of PTSD. So that goes into this discussion about all these other things that can be create resilience to or show impact from the trauma that we experience, and how that leads to the severity of post-traumatic stress disorder. So there's a lot of research on that, to be so to say. And there are kind of three categories that are developed to understand post-traumatic stress. There's how we are before the trauma, how we are during the trauma. There's the peri-trauma, what happens to us. And then what happens to us after the trauma, post-traumatic. That's where the term PTSD comes in. So there's a comparison that can be made on the trauma, back to the COVID example, some of us, pre-trauma, we're very social and engaged in the public without any thought or consideration of feeling harm or threat, and a lot of us today have adjusted our social activities. Some of us go shopping when we know the crowd in the store is going to be a lot less than other times during the day, for example, or we mask up when we're in a room with a lot of people. Things like that are some of the pre-trauma and post-traumatic ways that we've adjusted to the impact of COVID. During the trauma, we've all had to wear masks, and we've all had to get immunized. Most of us had to get immunized, and during the pandemic, we experienced quite a few deaths and illnesses during the pandemic. So that's an example of those three categories. Next slide, please. Go ahead and click it again one more time. There's a graphic that should be showing.
Just wanted to let you know Dan is on the line. Hi, Dan.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning, brother. Want to introduce yourself real quickly to everybody?
Naamutaki Dan Foster, Manchipelo. Nahayu Chante Washtena, Pichuakilo. Greetings, folks. One of the ways we greet each other is, particularly in the Southwest, is by family and clan and tribe. I'm one of those folks whose mom kept moving west and kept having new love children. I have 8 brothers who are enrolled in 7 different tribes. And the only tribe that I had adequate blood quantum was Western Band Cherokee, even though I know the least about it. At that time in the Lakota Dakota Nation, it required a quarter in a particular band. But my family is a very friendly family and dysfunctional. And so my brothers represent multiple Lakota Dakota bands, and so be it. But I have numerous children and grandchildren, and I find that my issue is not that unusual now. As a child, I felt a bit out of bounds. So for those of you it's real important about you, I say Cherokee, but really culturally, I'm Lakota Dakota. That's how I grew up. Pleasure to be here. I'm a veteran. I do live with PTSD, and I've also had the privilege of being a psychologist and working with many of our own relatives living PTSD. So I'll be quiet and listen and learn. Thank you.
My dear brother, we have much to learn from you. Please feel free. You want to talk on this slide here, or?
I will listen.
Okay.
Because, but just a foundational thing, and not knowing what you said it takes me and electronics are not friends, and smoke signals don't work anymore because there's fire everywhere. We keep asking our Canadian relatives here in Montana, would you guys quit smudging? We can't even see.
Yeah.
It's upsetting all of our asthma and stuff. Our relatives in Canada to quit smudging. It brought so much smoke to us. But one comment I do want to make is, if we'd have been here 20,000 years ago and witnessed a saber-toothed tiger or a dire wolf or any of a number of apex predatory animals, and it was a rainstorm and we were headed for the same cave, I really doubt that any of those mammals would have looked at this hairless, skinny, upright, walking, bipedal species and considered us any sort of threat at all. I bring that up because one of the things that we do in our culture is we're holistic and we don't really look at pathology per se. We like to find a source of a problem, but we don't particularly want to just get rid of symptoms. We like to go past that. We like to look at the source, and we look at things relationally, and what we want is balance. We want to restore balance. So our paradigm as American Indian people, and when you colonize people, one of the things you have to do is take away their language, take away their children, take away their belief system, take away their relationships with the earth, with the world, and replace it with your own. So all of us folks have been colonized. I'm not here trying to recruit for AIM or the Jehovah Witness, but I'm trying to explain that I consider PTSD what my relatives and any of us that are speaking English here are colonized guys. So it's part of us, and we turn on each other on that same basis. But I consider what we call PTSD as a very important survival mechanism. If our ancestors, prior to us domesticating the pup, becoming friends with the four-legged and the horses later and so forth, if they did not have PTSD, those people died because that dire wolf or that saber-toothed tiger or whatever it was, that apex predator, killed them. The people that woke up at every sound, the people that were on hyper alert and hyper arousal, we're descended from them. That was our survival mechanism. So I don't view it quite as pathologically as others do, but I do see it as a part of us that's very important to include and understand as we move forward so that we can compensate and sustain balance. Thank you, brother. Thanks for letting me.
Love your words. You're such a great teacher. And this slide is fairly self-explanatory, I think. We'll move on to the next one. And you know, like as described earlier in the previous slide, among our people, we have significant experience with adverse childhood experiences. There have been a couple of studies in Indian country related to the prevalence of ACEs among Native people. And then many of us have had the blessing of learning of Maria Braveheart's teachings on historical trauma. And many of us have incorporated those teachings into who we are, how we teach, and how we view the world. And I really appreciate my brother Dan's discussion about how we, many of us, will work on transcending that trauma, you know, and incorporating our learned experiences from trauma, and then transcending it, you know, learning to release our pain and transcending the trauma in a really good healing way, so that we're good human beings to each other. And that's the foundation of Maria Braveheart's teachings on historical trauma. It is not only about the impact or the trauma itself, but it is about transcending. So I felt this was valuable to show, and you see in the ACEs part of the slide the kind of impacts that happen through adverse childhood experiences, as my brother alluded to, and you know, many of us share those impacts as well. Next slide, please. You know, we're aware that there's been a modification to the DSM-5, and I've shown this a couple of times because I keep wanting to reflect on the significance of these modifications that have occurred to DSM-5 and now showing the TR. And you'll see that there is a revision made to the post-traumatic stress disorder part of the DSM, formerly DSM-5, now the DSM-5-TR, as well as those other conditions that are described in the 4 other areas. Next slide, please. Symptoms, well, these are some of the symptoms that are noted in the DSM-5. There are clusters related to symptoms, and that we can have some discussion about. Many of you are clinicians, so you're probably aware of this, but for those of us that are relatives here who are not clinicians and wondering what the DSM-5 is, it's a manual. It's a book of yay thick and has a lot of things written about it that guides people who do therapy and mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, and how to understand someone who might be having really strong difficulty in life. And so the DSM-5-TR is like a guidebook to people who work in mental health. Next slide, please.
One quick question, Ray. On the previous
Yeah.
slide, there was HTUG when we were talking about historical trauma. Could you clarify what HTUG is?
Oh, historical trauma and unresolved grief.
Thank
That's
you.
that's a phrase developed by Maria and the Dakini Network. The Dakini Network that Maria developed about 30 years ago are a group of allies that help guide teaching and formalizing the historical trauma process that was mapped out in that diagram. And fortunately, some of us have been included in the Dakini Network with Maria and really gained from her teachings that way. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Oh yeah, I see that. PTSD and complex PTSD symptoms, there's actually a categorization that happens within what is called PTSD. There's in PTSD, we have this sense of threat, avoidance, and re-experiencing that guides our survival instincts. What Dan was talking about with our ancestors is really like that. Being a vet too, we do end up oftentimes being more hypersensitive than other times in our experiences as veterans from our experiences being in the military. And so that sense of threat kind of is there often, and sometimes a little more intense than other times. And we avoid, a lot of us, as I've mentioned in the COVID experiences that we've had, we have some avoidance behaviors that we still express, that we still show from the COVID. And we have relatives and friends among us who are being infected by COVID still. So we understand that re-experiencing COVID is not something that we'd like to do. From that is complex PTSD, which is we have interpersonal experiences. Yesterday I was talking to a guy a veteran actually, who was telling me how he's having to really monitor his interpersonal disturbances as a veteran, and how the COVID period, serious COVID period, in a way was helpful for him and his tendency to isolate himself from people. He said, he was telling me, so I was able to isolate my people during COVID. And he said, I got fairly comfortable with that. And now that we're coming out of COVID, he said, his wife is reminding him not to self-isolate the way he tends to want to be and tends to do. And so he's saying he's working on reintegrating himself back into whatever normal world is. And we're laughing about that, how in a weird sort of way that the COVID pandemic helped us isolate, and how we're doing that. And that sense of threat is there, and avoidance, and one of the common features of complex PTSD is re-experiencing of what they call flashbacks. You know? So, next slide, please. There are some treatment approaches to some basic treatment approaches to post-traumatic stress syndrome. You want to talk to this, Dan?
Just texting you, Ray, but I'm going to talk. I'll just offer a generalization and then look for what you have to share. But one of the things that we've really learned, again, I'm not meaning to be a rabble rouser, but colonization, part of what it did was try to, none of this was intentional. It was all in order to grab land and resources, and certainly to let us live as people, but to live as Euro-American people and not as Dene, not as Pueblo, not as Cherokee, which I know little about, not as Dakota. And so the concept was in Rome, and I mean, this has been a process. One thing I'll tell you about, you think that Four Corners has had some suffering, go to Europe and go to any country you want to mention, and the ground is saturated with blood. Our European natives have killed and destroyed for centuries among themselves before they ever headed out to Africa or the West Indies or India, China, all these other countries they saw it. I bring that up because we've much of treatment for PTSD that's so helpful for us to regain balance is really sideways. Rhythm, the songs, so many of your blessing ceremonies, so many of the Nay ceremonies, well, those of you that are in Native American church, the peyote songs, the water drum I don't practice those ways myself. I am a Wiwangwachipi. I am a sun dancer and have raised my children and grandchildren, as were my siblings and I, as was my parents and grandparents, and so continued in that way. But we found that treatment for PTSD make a lot of sense as we learn more about the neurological and neurophysiology of the brain. But we found that our culture already has these elements involved in it for our maintenance, our sustenance of balance. I do not think PTSD was a major issue for us prior to occupation. And so to me, we do have to turn to the Western medicine to better understand it in order to our balance here. I hope that's germane, brother. Thank you.
Very germane and very much, you're right on target with that, Dan. Thank you very much. And as we look in these broad descriptions of some of the standard approaches to PTSD treatment, many of us say we're grounded in the cognitive approaches and we understand the cognitive modalities and how to be with someone who's experiencing some of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Exposure treatment is used also, but that's kind of I think a harder, more difficult process to do. And many of us prefer not to take that approach. Medications, of course, are there. A lot of our veterans are on medication for the kinds of severe anxiety or depression or personality problems that develop from severe PTSD. And of course, a lot more of our people are moving towards alternative medicines. Alternative approaches like Dan described, sweat lodge and singing of songs, grounding ourselves in our ways a lot better. And then more of our young people are including CBD as part of their daily life to move through the impacts of honestly COVID. I think a lot of our relatives are using marijuana and, as well as a way to medicate through the emotional and cognitive difficulties that come up from having lived through a difficult time in our lives. Next slide, please. There are traditional approaches to deal with PTSD, and my brother really described really well some of those approaches. Our prayers, our songs, the way our ancestors really worked at emphasizing fitness as a way to live a healthier life, and that included avoiding not being fit. You basically had to be fit to be able to be a good relative. And at the bottom is meditation and mindfulness, but we're taught, I'm sure my brother Dan can talk about the process involved when a young person goes to Bear Butte, for example, it does the ceremony alone. That all involve being aware and mindful, and contemplate about where we are, to be able to have a fit life, to be able to be a trusted relative, and to be able to do songs and prayers. Do you want to add anything more, Dan?
I want to be careful as I say this to our relatives that are listening. So please, but see, our culture is very relational, not just relational to other human beings, not just relational to four-leggeds, but relational to air, to water, to earth, to fire, to place. Why do I bring that up? Because our culture includes those elements that are so essential to me for sustaining balance. And so we, in the ceremony, I don't know about some of you, but I was raised by old people. Supposedly I was helping them with wood stove and things like that. Right. My grandfather, my first father, you might say. I mean, we lived in a family compound, so it wasn't that I was away from my siblings and stuff, but just one of my siblings and myself lived with him until he passed back in 1959. I say that because I learned so much listening to him talk with other elders, and they spoke no English, and so I didn't learn English till later on in boarding school. Why do I bring that up? Because I understood very vividly the importance of food, of sharing food, the importance of drinking water after grief, the importance of prayer and song. And again, if whatever way you want to go, or whatever way you do go. But see, in the dominant society, I was shocked that I could become a psychologist and become a Dr. Foster. I was hurt while I was in the Army and hospitalized for some months, and so I read a lot. And for some reason, I could retain what I read. So what a fortunate young man I was, because sometimes PTSD can really get in the way of retaining new knowledge. Instead, I became kind of a nerd. I didn't even know I had nerd in me. I didn't even know the word nerd. And I started loving learning. Why do I bring that up? Because I decided I was going to become a psychologist. I'd never met one. I didn't trust any white male psychologist sufficiently to do what I'm doing with you today. I became a psychologist without ever having utilized one. I had such profound distrust from some of my boarding school experience towards white males that, and here I'm in the Army with white males. I mean, I came, they were friendly to me, but I was polite and respectful back. But some of them that are now my friends, my kids call them uncle, I did not reciprocate their friendship till 20 years after we were out of the service. That whole time they sustained the friendship with me. How crazy is that? I bring that up because relationships really, really matter. But in the dominant society, I became a doctor and nobody even knew my character. All it required is that I could memorize things in the Western world and regurgitate it verbally. How crazy. We wouldn't let you be the first one to breathe on a baby if we didn't know your character. The woman that put that first air, so it was so different to me from our culture to this culture, that because character is essential for that one pouring the water. So sorry to take so much time, Ray, but it always offended me that I would ask for people, because I found that trauma stories are every bit as intimate as, say, sexual intimacy. I have never discussed my sexual intimacy with a loved partner with anybody. Why would I? That's private. That's personal. I've found that my trauma story is very similar. And so, again, Megan and Ray's known me for a few years, but I did not go to the VA for services because one of the things that I was going to need to do is give them a trauma story. And I didn't. We only tell those war stories in particular ceremonies at particular time, and we're careful about how we tell it. We don't get into what I call trauma tourism. We don't get into detail, and we don't get into graphics, and we don't get into affective stuff like the dominant society does in movies and different things. And yet, much of this therapy that Ray is presenting, it's a one-way relationship. The therapist better not be reciprocating on the stories. How do you do this? In our way, our ceremonies are interactive. They are reciprocal. They do go back and forth, and you do make relatives of one another. We codify. One of the ways Ray's calling me my brother. He doesn't mean that literally, and yet he does. With that comes obligation and responsibility. We are very relational, but sometimes we're also indirect. And so some of the Western ways, I'm being candid and I hope I'm not offended, but they trouble me. Why would I ask you to tell me details of your trauma and I don't reciprocate in any way, shape, or form? We don't have a relationship. I don't agree with that type of therapy, and I've never practiced it. So I'm not a very good therapist, folks. Okay, bless you, brother. Keep going.
I love what you're saying. Next slide, please. Click it again. Go ahead. There we go. It's just a pause slide earlier, but DQ, you've been on the earlier presentations. You've seen this graphic before by T. Bigfoot. I really love the way she modeled indigenous therapeutic practices, and there are a number of approaches in our ways that are beneficial for PTSD. And I think we've just heard a really fine example by my brother Dan about how we engage my people. We have. I look at the Navajo system, and it's no surprise. It's not surprising to me that in the Navajo system, the Bideway ceremony is paramount to all other ceremonies, and how all other ceremonies, if they're which are basically ceremonies to get through a difficult, harmful illness or experience, how these healing ceremonies all close with blessing way songs. The blessing way songs that we have in the Navajo system close out all the other ceremonies. And what our elders say is you can do a monster way ceremony or enemy way ceremony or any other ceremony, but you always have to close with beauty way to tie it all up, to end it in that real blessed way, so the person can continue their life experience, like my brother said, in a healing, healthy way, and not go back to what they have been healed from. And so that's how that is. And a lot of our struggles these days seems to be like Dan said, I think Dan is saying, is regurgitating the trauma time and time again, and less towards taking that beauty process that many of us are taught in the ceremonies that we have. Next slide, please. And back one more. There. And the experiences are that I think that my brother Dan and I are sharing basically is through the process of taking that healing path that Maria describes in the historical trauma and Najazat brief model that she teaches from, is to have us to be resilient, to have us to be motivated, to have us be effective, successful, and be these ways that are shown in this diagram. And that ultimately is how we are to be in a traditional spiritual way. That whether we're doing the Native American church or the Navajo system or Lakota system or Ojibwe system or traditionalism, but also in a Judeo-Christian way. You know, the teachings in the Bible really are about resilience. And the example in the Bible of how Jesus, for example, is a prime model for strength and growth and empowering and attitude in very difficult times is a really nice process. And much of the hymns that come in a Christian ceremony, and church is a Christian ceremony, and those ways are developed so that we can have positive reactions and believe in ourselves and our relationship to the higher power, God. So they're very synonymous. All these spiritual traditional ways are very synonymous to each other. Next slide, please. So what are some of the Euro-American ways to help someone coping with PTSD? I use the word Euro-American, not Western, because like my brother said, you know, the colonization of Europe happened from Roman Christians, the Roman process, and Rome used Christianity as a way to colonize all the rest of those countries that are north, east, and west of it. And so PTSD has these features when we're in that state. And these are some of the ways that are there to help. Next slide, please. Well, guess what? This month, June, is PTSD Awareness Month. One of the ways we've been helping each other and our relatives and our friends is by acknowledging this and incorporating this exploration of PTSD awareness into the work that we do. The first resource group, within the SAMHSA system, for example, there are a number of tools and ways to help bring awareness to our people that, you know, if we say we're having PTSD, to go through that and become aware of that and become aware of how to heal from that experience and be healthier for each other and healthier for ourselves.
One of the things, if I can take a moment here, is at the boarding school that I attended, we had chapel every day. We had Bible study every day. They thought I was retarded because I was so light-skinned, but I spoke no English, and they wouldn't let us talk to my siblings or my cousins or my friends to try to understand the English words. And so it was third grade before I really had enough of a management of the English language to participate in the classroom. But I bring that up because a story that always appealed to me was the story of Joseph. I like the story of when he met his siblings later on. And he said, no, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. I like this story, but I never liked the story of Job. And I must say that until this time of COVID, when my brother Ray and myself, we had so much death within our own home. I buried people I love so much, and culture keepers, people that don't drink, don't smoke, they don't live risky lifestyles. These, some that I said goodbye to, I expected them to say goodbye to me. I expected them to serve our people, add into the definite future. Why I'm bringing this up is because we have a multi-generational household. I still do. My wife and I are elders in our community, and we're called on. But during COVID, we weren't able to do the ceremony lead the things that we're trained in. And where I'm going with this is, as a child, my most difficult ceremony was Hamletchiapi, going on the hill by myself. I didn't like my own company for 4 days and nights. I liked the company of my siblings, of my uncles and aunts, my cousins, my grandparents, the people that came and went, the children, the nieces and nephews. I liked their company. Even though we were kind of quiet, I enjoyed having others around. Job troubled me because it felt like God was playing with him. And through this very difficult time of loss, it was so important for my wife and I to somehow keep our balance for the sake of those children that were depending on us, those grandchildren that were depending on us. I bring that up because of my love for them. I sought to keep calmness in the home. I sought to keep stability and continuation. I got COVID 3 times myself and got quite ill. The last 2 times was even more ill than the first time. And so I spent even weeks in a hospital this last time, and I'm still gaining strength back. And I wasn't sure I was going to stick around. I was affected in essential ways. But where I'm going with is I really appreciated the story of Job after that, because one of the things that I did learn on the hill through my lifetime, all the times that I've gone up to fast and pray for our people, is me was never big enough to be strong, to be courageous. We always has been. And I can remember those who went before me that left a mark within me. The grandpa I speak of, I still speak to him. So, guys, I speak to the dead. To me, they're not dead, and they speak with me through death, through the veil of death. They're in me. When we sing songs, I hear their voices. Not literally, but yes, sort of literally. The ones that aren't there and the ones that aren't born yet also join us in song. That's part of what I like about the circularity of culture. And so I bring up the story of Job because somehow through all of that, I did come to a very profound sense of relationship with creation, with creator, with origins, with future. And that's not God playing with anybody. That's a human being that has found a center. And with life or death, we'll be able to face it because of that relationship with spirit. Thank you, Ray.
Yes, thank you very much, brother, for sharing your wisdom with us. So what are some of the other ways that are out there in particularly in our country, resources to have a balanced perspective towards healing? Is one of the major resources in our country's National Alliance on Mental Health. They have a lot of literature out there on not only describing symptoms and diagnosis, but also ways to heal and ways to reach out and ways to support each other. So NAMI is very good about that. We also have a National Center for PTSD that exists virtually. Web system. Both these groups, as well as the foundation, PTSD Foundation of America, all 3 of these groups do a good number of training and networking in the country to help us, work with us on understanding hope and healing, the process of hope and healing that Dan described so well for us. So one of the misunderstandings, I think, about post-traumatic stress disorders is around diagnosing and treating it, but the ultimate outcome of it all, as well as in our ways, is to be hopeful and to heal, and to be good human beings with each other, and to care for each other in ways that our ancestors did to survive thousands of years of existence to where we are today, still in this country. So these are some resources that are there. Next slide, please. And once again, the emphasis in our ways, and the emphasis that comes out of PTSD work is a healing. To begin to have an expression of love and kindness, to be able to feel the abundance of relationships that come into our lives, and to have gratitude, and to be humble, and to be respectful with each other. That is healing. And that was the gift of learning ways to, first of all, be good to myself, and be good to relatives, and be good to friends, and be good to relations in the world, and to have gratitude for all the things that are in our lives. And I think my brother Dan does a really good job at sharing his understanding of these ways also. I wanted to say that this is Dan, you want to speak on what you just put in chat?
One of the things that I think that really does matter, for example, Ray mentioned with combat vets, often among combat vets, there's much that's never spoken. But the fact that we shared the lived experience makes a difference in our trust. Trust is not something that's easily given or gained. And yet, if we don't give trust, we can never have love or intimacy. So I found that, I've learned in what you call the Euro way. I've found that, well, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I don't believe that. You can fool me 100 times. If I'm going to love you, it's important that I continue offering trust to you. So if you trust, I agree. I tell people trust is like a Christmas tree. We grew up poor, and so we took on the Easter Bunny, we took on Halloween, we took on, so talk about colonized. Our family just looks for any opportunity to celebrate and be silly and have fun together. Birthdays and divorce days and stuff. We'll celebrate the whole thing. One of my sons married a Navajo girl, and we teased. We said, "We're going to have traditional ceremony. We're going to eat sheepdog." Okay, I'll leave it. But back to we were poor, and so if a Christmas tree ornament broke, we would try to figure out how to glue it together. We couldn't afford the trading post to just replace everything. Good luck replacing a Christmas tree ornament. So I compare trust to a Christmas tree ornament that we're constantly tossing back and forth. And one big squeeze or one inerrant throw, it's going to break. So trust will be broken many times. And so we need to offer trust one more time than it's broken if we're going to continue loving and being loved. And so when we share lived experience, so often I was one of those kids violated at boarding school. But in my lifetime, I've been able to be a protector of adults and children that have been violated. I've been able to stand between them and the people that were hurting them. And sometimes those people that were hurting them were my own relatives, were people that I loved, people that I cared about, people that I still love and still care about. Our infrastructure's broken. Very often the ones who went to prison were the honest ones, the ones that were truly perpetrators and sustained habituated. They're still free. They're still among us. Where am I going with all of this? Is because in loving each other and in receiving that love, we keep offering and giving trust, and we do it indefinitely. And I've worked with rapes and so forth when I've been called into the ER, and quickly I realized that I had 3 generations of females that had been wounded by men, been violated. Their trust had been betrayed by men, and they couldn't comfort each other at those moments because they hadn't healed. So I think it's really important to heal from PTSD so that as elders, Ray and I can reach out to our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, encourage them, give them hope and trust. So I'm thankful for talk therapy. I'm also thankful for the drum. I'm also thankful for the blessing wheel. I'm also thankful for the Sundance and the Hamblechi. I'm so thankful. It's a way of healing, and it's so important to me that you find some of them. And I found that the best predictor of the ultimate outcome is your level of gratitude. And something I've always appreciated about our Lakota Dakota ways is when I go out and pray in the morning, you folks offer corn, I offer tobacco. but I go out with gratitude. I go out welcoming this new day, not with some. I'm not going out there with a list of things that I want accomplished that day or a list of healings that I want, but I'm praying for those that are sick, that they can manage their sickness with as much joy and with as much comfort and with much courage as possible. Does that make sense? So healing, sometimes it's not physical healing. Sometimes it's spiritual and relational. Sometimes it's being able to accept the inevitable. For example, all living beings will die. Well, thank you, Ray, for allowing me some time, and thank you folks for listening. And I hope that some of this touches you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Dan. We have a question, Ray. Can you discuss the differences or similarities between collective/historical trauma and PSD, please?
Mhm.
PTSD.
Yeah, well, as I'm reading that question, I think one of the primary similarities with historical trauma and PTSD is that there's the process of assessing. When you look at the historical trauma model and how it talks about confronting the trauma of a people, that's an assessment process. We look at our people's historical experiences with trauma as a community, as a people, and we gather information on that. And then the second part of the historical trauma model, which is about understanding the impact of that trauma, is a further assessment into how that ancestral trauma has led to how we are today, or how we've come today. And that's basically the process involved. But PTSD is a very individual approach to understanding the impact of a trauma on an individual person, versus historical trauma taking more of a collective community approach to how a trauma is affecting a group of people. So that's built into that, I think. And the thing that I love about Maria's work is that those experiences are different across people. The Holocaust experience of the Jewish people, for example, is quite different from the Holocaust experience of Native Americans over here. And so that understanding is really valuable to hear. But also the Holocaust experience of the Ojibwe people is quite a bit different from the Holocaust experience of the Navajo people. And so our assessment and understanding of colonization with the Ojibwe and with the Navajo would be different. And I think Dan did a really good job of describing some of the Lakota Holocaust experiences. And that's the value of doing that assessment on the impact of trauma on our people. But ultimately, both processes lead to individual healing within PTSD and collective healing, community healing within the historical trauma model. There's a healing emphasis. Being well, and then getting well, being well, and staying well is built into both processes, I think. So I hope I answered your question. Anything you want to include there, Dan?
Thank you, brother. I was trying to text, but healing doesn't mean cure. We can have scars. I tried to milk a cat. My first pet was a cat named Bootsy, and Bootsy was nursing on my bed. It gave birth on my bed. And I thought, if those kittens can get some milk, I can get some milk. I still have the scar on my right hand by my little finger base joint where Bootsy bit me. Now, Bootsy only bit me once. That was because I tried to milk her with fingernails. So I encourage people listening, don't try to milk a cat. It will not work out for you or the cat. One trial learning. I bring that up because that scar, I'm in my 70s and I still have that scar. We can have healing without cure. And yet that scar was such an important lesson. And all the cats that I've had subsequently don't even know Bootsy, but I can assure you that they're thankful that Bootsy taught me a lesson. Thank you for laughing, Ray.
I've never tried to milk a cat, but I'm going to learn from your teachings, brother, and carry it on. Take the next slide, please. How do we, this goes back to the question earlier about the similarities and differences within historical trauma and PTSD. It's about achieving that balance in our lives so that we can be good to each other. I'm always going to emphasize that. Moving from that is moving to a healing path, especially with complex PTSD, is difficult for our relatives. A lot of our relatives who aren't maybe as grounded in ways to be healthy and ways to be well. And one of the first steps for a lot of our folks, because when you're experiencing a trauma response that is really difficult, you have these reactions that are there, and there's one of the major reactions is isolation. You isolate, you tend to pull back, withdraw. And the 988 system is a tool there for our relatives and our people who have withdrawn from living, who have withdrawn from feeling able to reach out to a relative or a family member or friend or even a helper. So it's one of those first steps that's really there for our people to begin to move through, begin moving towards a healing way. And we have these tools that are developed within our state. We're fortunate in New Mexico that we have a beginning of a good system for our people. And our social media tools for our young people, especially who are struggling, working through their pandemic experiences, and I think what I'm grateful about spending time with the grantees, especially with that SHAR has put together as a coalition, is that we have this time to really exploring ways to include 988 education and outreach with the work we do with our family members that are feeling alone and having ways to reach out. So this is how we begin to achieve balance. Next slide, please. And we'll move on to the case study that Shar developed for us today. Shar?
Hi, everybody. So it's 10:10 and we'll, there's a question. So before I start, is it simple as asking someone to love life? That's a response. And I think it's for Dan. Dan put, what does one who chooses to love life, believe, think, speak, do? And then a response was, is it as simple as asking someone to love life?
Thank you for asking that question. Part of what I'm talking about is not, I don't think we heal as me. I think we only heal as we. And even so even as we, and we don't suffer alone. I think we suffer collectively as well. So I could tell you my uncles that were affected by World War II in Korea, we didn't have the word PTSD, but we knew we have what we call waktegli. When people come back from war, we set them outside for 4 days, 4 days of sweats, 4 days of pipe ceremony. We use a pipe with all of our 7 most sacred ceremonies, but we have many more ceremonies than those 7. But the Chinupa Wakan, the pipe is central to all of them. Now, I'm not trying to advocate because I don't think our way is the way. I think it's simply our way. I don't think Christianity is the way. I think it's a Christian way. I'm glad people remember Jesus Christ. I will remember Ray Dahl. If Ray outlives Dan Foster, he will remember Dan Foster. Am I Jesus Christ? No, I'm not. I am alive, though. And gravity holds me to earth and spirit holds me to creator. So I'm spiritual and I'm not more or less spiritual than anybody else. So when I talk about love, love does matter to me because love is essential to me, for our people. We don't even have that in our language. We don't have the word love. It's assumed. It's like gravity. It's assumed. It's assumed you're not going to float away while we talk. If you came up to me and told me, Dan, I need your help healing, and I started pushing you, and if you're a young man, you'll get your testosterone up and you'll punch me out. But one of the things you'll keep doing while I'm pushing you is regaining your balance. It's within us to regain our balance. I've asked before, do we have any healers in the room? And nobody raises their hand. The Indians are so modest. Then I'll ask, has anybody here ever had the flu? You don't know what the flu is. It's one of thousands of different retroviruses. But everybody raises their hand. I said, well, then what are you doing here? You're spreading the flu. And they laugh and they say, well, no, I had the flu, but I healed. Who healed you? You healed within yourself. Creator gave us the capacity for lots and lots of self-healing. That's what a scar is. So it's within us to heal from PTSD. And sometimes it's the opposite. As Ray said, we tend to withdraw. We tend to avoid. We become afraid of everything, becomes a signal of danger. And so we retreat, which is a normal mammalian to a wounded mammal. So if you want to study other mammals, you'll see that these characteristics are not just in the two-legged, they're also in the four-legged, also to some extent, even with the winged ones. So thanks for asking that question. So I don't think any of these is simple by itself. I think it's only in relationship with earth, air, wind, fire, with creator, with creation, with the unborn, with those that have left us, and with those that are living now. Thank you for that question. I hope that answered. My wife says, you're so heavenly minded, you're not much earthly good. So my wife is the practical one, and I'm the dreamer. Thank you.
Good. Okay. Go ahead, Char.
Thank you, Dan. Dan's just reminded me of, the holistic view that we all take in trying to heal. We all have different perspectives. We all have different backgrounds. What works for you, and it may not work for all of our clients, right? All of our clients come from different walks of life. I know when I was doing more clinical work, the first thing I would ask the youth, because I primarily worked with adolescents, is what's your belief system? Is it church? Is it traditional? A combination? I always had to assess that, because that was the way I was going to reframe things and try to join them in the session and try and build rapport with the individual. That's a really important question, I think, in the assessments that we do as clinicians. And then as you are walking with your client in this journey of healing, it's really important to identify, are they active in their church? Are they active in their traditional ways? Because then you get a better sense of how they see the world and how they incorporate healing into their lives. And sometimes it's even pointing out, you are healing yourself by praying every morning. You are healing yourself by listening to the songs. You are healing yourself when you do sing the songs. And sometimes I think living in this fast-paced world, we forget that. Because I don't know how many of you live in urban settings versus, on the reservation versus in rural settings. Sometimes we forget that. So I live in town in Albuquerque, but home is First Mesa, Palaca, Arizona. So every time I go home, I just unplug. Like, I totally turn off all phones. I'm on the rock. I just totally just go from house to house, visiting my aunts, visiting my uncles, and hearing about, stories. That's healing. That's healing. So always remember those things as you guys work with your clients. I think that's really, really important. Spending time with relatives can heal the spirit, even if it's a phone call. I don't know about you guys, but I have an aunt who's like, get it together. And then I have another aunt who will just laugh and make me laugh and bring joy to my spirit. So I use both those aunts in my life. So I hope you have folks in your lives that can assist with that. It's 10:15. I know we have 15 minutes before everybody has to log off, but we've always done, like, what are the signs and symptoms of PTSD, or what are the signs and symptoms of depression, our model has been giving you signs and symptoms of the disorder that we wanted to learn about, talk about Western approaches or your American approaches to treat that disorder, and then traditional components to treat that individual. And then we bring you a case study. So that's the format we've been using. And this case study is about Catherine, a 35-year-old female, was in a bad car accident 2 years ago. She was thrown out of her car, hit by a drunk driver. She doesn't recall much from the incident, and the other passenger survived with her in the crash. She woke up in the hospital with bruised ribs, a fractured neck, and a hand injury which required a cast. She was never really formally diagnosed with traumatic brain injury, and she still feels guilty about that car accident. And before the accident, Catherine was in a physical and emotional abusive relationship for 5 years. Her boyfriend was very jealous, controlling. He would harass her at work. She lost her job because of that. She finally left him and was moving on with her life, and then the accident occurred. She worked on her physical recovery and realized that every car noise or backfire increased her heart rate and panic would set in. She rarely travels outside her house because she's afraid she'll be hit and be in another car accident. She does not want to drive and must always know, where are we going? What time will we be back? She has flashbacks when she's on the road. That's why she doesn't want to drive. And she's had intense nightmares. Now she's been agitated, getting upset very easily, low feelings of self-worth. She feels like she's never going to get better. She's not working because of these intrusive thoughts, and it keeps her isolated, and it keeps her moving forward in life. So in your opinion, what do you think is going on in this case study? What do you think Catherine is experiencing? You guys are quiet this morning. Tell me, what do you think Catherine's feeling after 2 years of this accident and feeling like she can't get outside of her house to even go into her car? What do you think that must feel like?
Trauma. She's
Trauma.
experiencing the trauma of the event, because this happened to me and I had the exact same experience. So I remember just getting in a car to go after the accident, and I'm like, slow down, just everything was so traumatic and hyper aroused, I was just overwhelmed. And so I did some of the stuff. Eventually it went away, but it took months for it to be normal again for me. So she's experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder from the accident. Am I right?
Yes. Yes. What are some of those signs and symptoms? I saw one that said fear. What are let's pinpoint some signs and symptoms.
Anxiety, for sure.
Anxiety. What about the physical symptoms? What else is going on?
Agitation.
Flashbacks. Yep.
Mhm.
What about the heartbeat? What's going on there?
Elevated.
Yes. Trigger response, the heart rate. I don't know if you guys ever experienced your heart rate going when you're really anxious, and then you feel like the heartbeat's in your neck, and then you just panic, and because your thoughts are getting the best of you, right? So the flashbacks, the agitation, the heart rate, that hyperarousal that was discussed. Do these sound like similar symptoms Ray pointed out for PTSD? What do you guys think?
100%.
Mhm. Yes, right? There's another aspect going on besides the car accident. What else is going on?
She suffered from physical and emotional abuse for 5 years.
Yes, the impact of intimate partner violence. Does it sound like in this case scenario, she had time to deal with just that end of that relationship?
No,
Right. What happened after the relationship ended?
She was just starting to move on and then she had this accident.
Yes. So can you imagine one thing to another thing and now feeling isolated? Like, can you see like two events going on and then the response to that?
Yep. And that would add to the low feelings of self-worth and thinking that she's never going to recover.
Yes, exactly. Is it Aveen?
Yes.
Thank you, Aveen. Exactly. So remember Ray was talking about, there's complex trauma, right? We can have one traumatic event happen, another traumatic event happen, and then another. And sometimes we can't decipher it all because it's all lumped together, but we can look at the symptoms someone's experiencing and talk about how to feel better. What's that healing journey going to look like for them? I keep thinking about like, how many of you have experienced now with the pandemic, grief and loss of our loved ones? Now we're having to deal with, what does our environment look like without them? And now we're reintegrating into community and ceremony that sometimes it does look a little different. So we all experience some type of, I guess, trauma in our lives. Grief and loss could be a traumatic event, right? Because it's somebody near and dear to our hearts, and the grieving process might be longer than Eurocentric ways, according to DSM 4. Are we on 5 now? DSM 5. So it's just really important when you guys are working with your clients to get that holistic point of view, to see what they really are going through and hear their story, hear what they have to say, and then really identify some of their assets. So this individual, Catherine, is talking about, hey, I'm realizing I'm having some symptoms and I'm not feeling right. And so then she's coming to your office to tell you her story. So what are some things that you guys could do with her after she tells you her story?
You could explore with her when she was in her relationship. What are the things that she was able to access in herself that managed to help her to sustain that and get through that? So that you're trying to identify some of her strengths.
Exactly. We all have strengths, right? But sometimes we're just so humble. We don't want to boast about ourselves, but we all have strengths. You're right. What are some other things we could do? What are some local resources?
I'm going to jump in a bit, Shar, too, but so it's not that I'm throwing away the Euro view, but it's so important, like Shar is saying, to engage relationally with this human being. And you don't have to share your whole story, but it's certainly, you can say, I have lost, I've lived through loss. I feel your pain. Do you follow what I'm saying? You don't have to share every detail of but you can be reciprocal. You can reciprocate as one who loves, as one who cares. Some of you even have pets. I've even been thankful for my pets at times when I've been avoidant of people. And my pets will come and lick, and my silly cat will put out its claws on I don't even like cats, but my kids do. So I have cats and dogs, and they'll scrap with each other and they'll make up. But my point is, there's many, many avenues of healing. And another thing that you're bringing up is, it's not the past that I work with, it's how the past is still affecting you today. So I'm working with you today, even though you're bringing forth the past. And we'll know, so one of the things I don't like of just getting rid of symptoms with medication and things is because the symptoms tell us that you're still hurting. And that pain will remain, and it lets me know when you're not hurting as much. When I start seeing laughter, when we start sharing smiles, when I see you reach out do you follow what I'm saying? So we stay compassionately curious about the symptoms as we deal with the whole person. How many of you ever had a child that could just start running? Not me, man. I put my hands around my little ones. They look like they were going to fall on their face, fall on their head. They tried again and again and again and again and again. So people need to share their story with you just one more time, then it hurts them. Don't tell them, okay, you need to get over this. You need to get past, and we all have those aunties and we all have those uncles, and bless them. I love them too. They're part of our healing. So all of these elements and components of our life. Thank you, Shar, for letting me share some more.
Sure, thank you. I did see in the chat, someone said, ask what happened to you. Yeah. And sometimes our clients may not be ready to say what happened to you. So then you focus on other areas of life. The point is to develop that relationship, right? Like you're talking to a relative and making sure you, capture as much as you can. And if the session's short, then it's short. That's fine. Hope, ask them to come back again the second time. Even sometimes a phone call to check and say, hey, was just thinking about you. How are you doing today? I would do that with clients sometimes. So just that reciprocity is really important, building that relationship. Yep, that's it. I know we're running out of time. It's 10:27. Were there any other questions about this case study?
Can I just ask a question? I know that they kind of dealt with it earlier, but so for me, as a human being coming into a situation, all of your past experiences, what your lens on the world. So I'm just concerned that, my curiosity is around this kind of like historical trauma, collective trauma, and then if we have this in our lens, our view of the world, this is something that can either, if we pull that around to the front of us, then you won't be able to see your clear path forward. So I'm just interested in how do we deal with this kind of like historical and collective aspect of trauma that sets us up, I believe, on a path to perhaps trip ourselves up, if that makes sense.
I think Dan put something. Do you want to elaborate, Dan? I see you put something in the chat.
Well, and I also want to respond to yours. So one of the things that's happening right now in the age we're living in is people are not wanting to be more inclusive. It becomes very complex to start understanding each individual, each family, each clan, each community. That becomes very complex. And so this is a very complex thing we're doing. And so I think it's critical that we share the accurate history, and that we offer, like Ray has talked about, we offer tools for healing, and we we offer opportunity for validation with people with shared life experiences who have come through the other side. Some of us get stuck there. We habituate and we get stuck. Sometimes we habituate the grief. We habituate the loss. We habituate the trauma. And so be it. Then I'm going to keep going back for you. If you can't come with me, then I'm going to keep going back for you. I'm going to keep checking on you. You're going to still be part of my life. Is that helpful to you? But I think we need to acknowledge our history accurately. But I don't need to share that which is private. I believe in privacy. I really protect privacy, and I also believe in truth. But I believe in truth with love, because the truth can get you 20 years. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I also believe in truth. I also believe in love. And I very much, I'm from Scotland, you might have guessed. But I am learning a lot about Native American culture, and I just have a great empathy around this collective and historical trauma piece, because we do have that in Scotland too. So that's where that comes from.
And just to add, I mean, kindness goes a long way, right? Kindness with respect.
Yes.
I think that, and gratitude, I think that goes a long ways when we're hearing each other's stories. I believe, we are the narrators of our own stories. Somebody shouldn't be telling our story. We're the narrators of our own stories. So gaining that empowerment back to tell our own story through our own lens is really important, and being respectful at that time that person is sharing their story with you, I think is vital. So I hope this helped everyone. I hope everyone feels like we only have 2 more. Can you believe that? We're almost done. We'll be done at the end of August. I know I've enjoyed this time with you guys. I feel our case study provides a lot of exploration, and you guys have had great questions. So I thank you for your time this morning, and I hope everyone has a safe holiday weekend and enjoy time with family and friends.
Next slide, Megan, please.
Okay.
Thank you, relatives. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Shar.
Yeah, next sessions are described here. Next slide, Megan. If you have any questions or thoughts or ideas, our next session is on suicide. Feel free to message DeNova, Megan, myself, or Dan, or Shar, and we can.
If any of you were upset with anything I said, I'll give you my wife's cell number.
Oh, Dan. Still love you for that.
Hey, this is Anderson.
Hi, Anderson. Go
Hello?
ahead. Go ahead.
Dan, I wanted to ask you a question. What tribe are you?
Oh, I put Western Band Cherokee in there because that was all that I was enrollable in 1950. But I'm not Western Band Cherokee. I know very little about them. But I'm Dakota, Siston Wapton. But my brothers, we kept moving west, and I ended up with brothers in Blackfeet and brothers Shoshone and Guy Lee, all the way west to Chemawa. So my mom still lives out in Oregon. Is that helpful for you? Does that answer you?
Yes, it is. I thought when you said something about when you said something, I just thought about that you're Dakota or Dakota.
Yeah. Culturally, our grandfather was Dakota, and that's what I learned to speak and language and ceremony.
I was just wondering about the Dakotas. I know that Ray knows a lot about, like, sometimes I go to these trainings with the Navajo medicine and talks about all these ceremonies, and they can really draw out, like, this is happening, this is the diagnosis, this is what's happening. Is that kind of the same way with Lakota too? Do they still have those ceremonies?
It is, and we do. And I'm talking to you from Utah State University in Utah, and our Society of Indian Psychologists is having its 31st annual convention. So I'm at that meeting, and we opened this with some cleansing ceremonies for all of the grief that our members have had, because we haven't met for 3 years. And so we had 3 Navajo relatives come up because we have many Navajo among our group here from Utah State University that have gotten their doctorates here. And so we took the first morning, we took the first 4 hours just to do ceremony among our constituents. And we did the Navajo way. And so three brothers that came up from Navajo. So yes, and even though each of our ceremony is different, see something that we didn't speak of too much here, but the spirit that's called forth, we recognize it. We have words for that. We have understanding, just like we do for gravity. And this love that people are talking about, it calls forth spirit, and spirit gives us direction. And every one of us has spirit within us. Every one of us is spiritual, whether we realize it or not. And there's a part of us, like a GPS, that's drawn to spirit. And part of what spirit brings us to is healing, restoration. Thank you for letting me speak.
Oh yeah, I mean, the reason why I was asking, I have a nephew that's Lakota or half Lakota, and we've been having Navajo ceremonies for him, but it seems like it's not working. And so I wanted to look for maybe like a Lakota medicine man. Maybe that would help. I'm not sure if that's a
reach out to me, and I'll see who we can link for you.
All right, yeah, that's what I was asking. So
yes, we do have, and you're right, though, not, sometimes the destiny of a person is such that they're gonna keep facing things, and even though we wish for a different outcome than what they're bringing in this life. And so there's sometimes that your folks can do the medicine that our folks don't have medicine for, you know, and vice versa. And sometimes neither one of us are able, we have, in our humanity, we sure do find limitations.
Okay, yeah, because his mother is Lakota, so I was thinking, you know, like even in Navajo, we always say we're our mother's clan, so maybe, you know, his original mother's clan might be the one that's going to help him a little bit. So yeah, I'm not sure, how do I get a hold of you?
I put it in the chat there, Anderson. I put Dan's email in there. If you want to reach out to him, you can copy that down.
All right,
Thank
I'll
you.
do that right now. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks, guys.
Oh.
Well, I hope everyone has a good rest of their day and take care until we see each other in a month. And thank you for joining us. Thank you to our presenters and everyone online today. It's good to see your faces. All right, have a good day. Thanks, guys.
Really enjoyed everyone's time. Dan, Sharp, everybody.
Thanks, Ray.
See you next month, Dan.